Back in the late 2000s when I was growing up, I had access to a family computer in which I got my first exposure to the internet. Being the small child that I was, naturally my first instinct was to find anything to entertain myself. Enter the browser game. A quick and easy way to entertain my 9-year-old brain for the next 30 minutes to an hour. Of course, these days browser games are a ubiquitous experience shared between many in the 18 to 24-year-old demographic and even further beyond that. But that wasn't always the case. The rise of the genre of games naturally coincided with the rise of the internet through the late 90s into the boom that was the 2000s and 2010s. As more users gained internet access worldwide, it was only a matter of time until the gaming market entered the fray. General consensus seems to point to one game being the first known game played only through a browser, that being a game called Earth 2025, a turn-based MMO that was launched in 1996. I can only find a couple screen caps of the game in its original form, but this was the start of the genre as we know it today, a free-to-play game only accessed through a web browser. At the time, and still to this day in many ways, in order to get a full gaming experience, it was required to purchase a cartridge or disc from one of the big three console manufacturers or a CD-ROM for your PC. This game set the standard for developers to create their own games and run them entirely through a website, a concept completely foreign to most gamers at the time. Fast forward a few years to 2001 and we get to RuneScape, one of the most popular MMORPGs of all time, up there with the likes of World of Warcraft and Phantasy Star Online. Although unfortunately no longer, RuneScape was a browser game that was free to play at launch, but has since moved to subscription-based models and a dedicated client for running the game. Despite its 22-year-old lifespan, old-school RuneScape still hits peaks of over 100,000 daily players regularly. These games are what helped shape the popularity of browser games as a genre over the course of a couple decades, but for the most part, they're outliers. When looking down from the shining tower these games put themselves on, you also see the vast amounts of garbage strewn about in the valley below. I'm sure many people had their first experience in games like the ones mentioned prior, but there's also a large portion that didn't, including me. My first introduction to the browser game, as I'm sure many of yours is, was through Flash games. Whether it be passing the time on a school computer or at home screwing around on the many platformers and strategy games found on Cool Math Games or Miniclip, these games were an integral part of my childhood. Games like Bloons Tower Defense or the Run games are what remind me of early times playing browser games. However, for every game that was like Run 2 or Bloons, there was 10 other cheap copies or poorly made Flash games. Although they served their purpose ultimately by wasting my time for 10 minutes or so, they were by no means meant to be a fully fledged out experience. And that was appearing to be the fate of this video's topic, GeoGuessr. As a quick rundown, in case you don't know, GeoGuessr is a browser game that launched in 2013 and involves guessing the location you're at to gain points, all through the use of the Google Maps service provided by Google Streetcars that allow you to explore the world through their streetcar coverage. When this game came out, I was still in that phase of playing browser games at school to pass time, and as I'm sure you're shocked to find out, I'm a huge geography nerd, so this game was a match made in I'm not passing English heaven. The game remained fairly popular over the course of the decade, with its Google search trends seemingly becoming very popular once the game released, and then stagnating over the following years. A game destined to fall into ambiguity among the plastic beach below the ivory towers. That was until the turn of the decade. In 2020, the world was under lockdown and people began to scour the internet for games like GeoGuessr, just something to pass the time. While I credit the lockdown for some of the increased traffic, it was mostly due to the virality of TikTok and YouTubers such as GeoWizard and Ludwig, who further propelled the game into its popular peaks in 2021. Another result of the pandemic can be traced right back to Rainbolt, one of the most popular GeoGuessr-based YouTubers, who used his time in isolation to become one of the best players in the world, all while going viral on TikTok and YouTube. This brings me back to the whole point of this video. How did GeoGuessr change the browser game as a whole? On the back of its rapid success, GeoGuessr announced a subscription-based model, with free-to-play only permitting one game per day. It's a $2.99 fee per month in order to get full access to the features of the game, which on its face seems sacrilegious, but it would end up changing the game in the best ways possible. In 2021, GeoGuessr introduced the online game modes, which included Battle Royale Countries and Battle Royale Distance. keeping even further interest in the game. Although the concept of a battle royale is hardly thought of as a unique idea these days, eventually 1v1 duels was introduced, with a competitive mode complete with seasons, rewards, and elo following closely behind. Competitive GeoGuessr is what brought the game to life and put its hat in the ring with the most popular games today. When GeoGuessr met its inevitable dip in player base following the boom in the 2021 and 2022 era, a sizable amount of the players who discovered the game during the pandemic or shortly after stayed as a direct result of the community built around the addition of these game modes. When I think of popular online games, I mostly think of the games that are competitive in nature, Rocket League, CS, or even League of Legends. Contrast that to the MMOs of the early 2000s, or the run-of-the-mill platformers that were everywhere across the internet, and it's not hard to see why GeoGuessr, with its modern design and heavily gamified mechanics, stand out to me. To me, GeoGuessr didn't reinvent the wheel per se with these additions, but it certainly took a huge step forward in modernizing the browser game as a whole, all off the back of Google Maps. The transition from a destined-to-be-forgotten browser game into a stable and living community makes GeoGuessr a landmark for the all-but-forgotten genre of browser games. Thanks for watching.